It started out as one of those quiet Saturday mornings where nothing major was planned. I sat down with my steaming cup of coffee, idly scrolling through TikTok and mentally scheduling the mundane tasks of the day, mowing the lawn being one of them. It was simply one of those easy, unhurried mornings where time seemed to stretch out indefinitely before me, inviting a slow pace and a sense of calm. That peaceful atmosphere was abruptly interrupted when I heard a knock at the door. At first, I assumed it was nothing more than a gust of wind or perhaps one of my neighbors casually stopping by. However, when the knock came again, this time a bit more insistent, I glanced at the clock. It read around 10:30 a.m., and I certainly had not expected any visitors at this hour. Curiosity got the better of me, and I got up to walk over to the door. Upon opening it, I was surprised to see Elena, the HOA president, standing there with an expression that blended professional composure with a hint of urgency. Everyone in our neighborhood knew Elena as the indefatigable neighborhood watchdog, the person always seen patrolling the streets, ensuring that every lawn was immaculately trimmed and every detail of the bylaws was strictly enforced, even those minor points that most residents barely knew existed. I had seen Elena around a few times before during my casual strolls or in passing at neighborhood gatherings, but I had never expected a visit from her on a day like this. "Good morning, Liam," she said with a smile that was almost too wide, as if she were putting on a performance. "I'm here for the inspection." Now, I wasn't unfamiliar with the routine inspections carried out by the HOA. They happened every so often, and usually there was some sort of official notice, whether it was a formal letter or at least a heads up from the board. So when she mentioned inspection without any prior warning, I immediately felt puzzled. "Inspection? What inspection?" I asked in a casual tone, trying not to show my confusion too openly. Elena did not appear to pick up on my uncertainty and continued in a matter-of-fact way. "Oh, it's just a routine check. We do these every so often to ensure everything is in order. I'll just inspect the outside of the house. It shouldn't take long." I paused and admitted I didn't receive any notice about this. It wasn't that I was angry. It was simply odd that she had shown up unannounced. I couldn't tell whether I was just being paranoid or if something genuinely wasn't right. With a dismissive wave of her hand, Elena moved past me as though she had every right to be there. "No need to worry about that," she said, already stepping around me, as if the unannounced arrival were perfectly normal. "We do these checks randomly. It's just part of the process." Even though something in her demeanor felt off, I decided not to push the matter further at that moment, not wanting to create a scene over what might have been a minor procedural quirk. Assuming it was merely a brief and straightforward check, I followed her outside. Elena started by circling around my house, beginning her inspection near the front yard. She examined the grass with an intensity that suggested it was a prized national treasure rather than a simple patch of lawn. "The grass could be a little shorter," she noted while scribbling on her clipboard, then added in an offhand tone, "You'll want to trim the edges too, or you might get a fine." I couldn't help but wonder why she was mentioning fines so early in the process. Granted, I did have a few patches of lawn that could use a bit of extra care, but nothing that would normally justify such a detailed inspection. Moreover, the casual mention of fines made it seem as though this was not solely about maintaining a neat yard. It hinted at a larger, more intrusive purpose. Elena didn't stop at the grass, however. She continued along the side of the house, pointing out minor imperfections. The fence wasn't perfectly aligned, and one of the trees had branches that extended too close to the building. These were all small issues with easy fixes, yet the more she scrutinized every detail, the more I began to question the true reason behind her visit. "I wasn't expecting any of this today," I remarked, trying to piece together her intentions. "Did the HOA send out any notice about this inspection?" I asked, seeking clarification. Without even lifting her eyes from her clipboard, Elena replied, "We don't always send notices. It's just how we keep the neighborhood in check." That answer unsettled me. I knew well enough from the HOA's official procedures that homeowners were supposed to receive a written notice at least 24 hours in advance, and there was no justification for Elena to be here making random checks without prior communication. Still, I didn't want to push too hard. After all, the last thing I needed was to antagonize her over what might seem like a small issue. Yet, just as I began to relax my concerns, Elena stopped at the back gate and turned to face me. I'll need to inspect the inside of the house too, she said casually, as if it were merely a routine addition to her checklist. My eyebrows immediately furrowed in surprise. Inside? I repeated, genuinely puzzled, since I had no memory of any mention of an interior inspection. Elena simply nodded, as if that were perfectly normal, adding, "It's just to make sure everything inside is aligned with HOA standards. I promise I'll be quick." A surge of unease swept over me. "No, I'm not letting you inside," I stated firmly, my voice steady despite the rising tension. I wasn't comfortable allowing a stranger into my home on a whim, especially when there had been no prior notice. I also doubted whether Elena had any real authority to demand entry in such an unannounced manner. Elena paused for a moment, her expression unreadable, then, in a noticeably colder tone, insisted, "Liam, I really need to check inside. You don't want to risk any fines, do you?" I held my ground, repeating, "I'm not letting you in. You can inspect the outside, but that's all." For a split second, her expression hardened, but she quickly recovered that same insincere smile. "Fine, but you'll regret this," she warned, before turning on her heel and walking back toward the front yard. I stood there, my mind racing with thoughts about what she meant by regret, and whether I should have allowed her entry. The whole encounter had felt off from the very beginning, and in the days that followed, I couldn't shake the disquieting feeling that something was seriously amiss. After I locked the door behind me that morning, I tried to get on with my day, but the memory of Elena's surprise inspection, her peculiar behavior, and the unsettling comment about future regret kept nagging at me. It wasn't just the unexpected inspection that troubled me. It was also the way Elena had conducted herself, the ominous remarks she left hanging in the air, and her insistence on entering my home without any prior notice. Under normal circumstances, I'd be pretty laid back about these things, but this incident felt distinctly out of line. Determined to get to the bottom of it, I decided to start by checking the HOA's rules online. I combed through the community documents and read the inspection guidelines carefully. As I had expected, the official guidelines clearly stated that homeowners must receive a written notice at least 24 hours before any inspection is scheduled. I had received nothing. It became abundantly clear that Elena had stepped beyond her bounds, though I wasn't yet ready to jump to conclusions without a fuller understanding of the situation. Later that day, I reached out to several neighbors to see if anyone else had experienced a similar incident. I texted Sophia, a long-time resident, who was always well-informed about every little neighborhood detail. She replied promptly, "That's really odd. I've never heard of any inspections being carried out without notice. I usually get an email or a letter a week or so in advance. Have you tried calling the HOA?" Her response immediately set off alarm bells in my mind. If Elena was merely following procedure, why did everything feel so off? Encouraged by Sophia's advice, I decided to contact the HOA directly. I called the number listed on their website and left a detailed voicemail explaining the situation, not expecting a quick response, but hoping to clarify the matter. The next day, I received a return call. The representative who answered was polite, yet frustratingly vague. When I asked about the inspection, they explained that it was part of a routine review of the neighborhood, but they offered no clear explanation for Elena's unannounced visit, only assuring me that I was not on any violation list and that the check was meant to be general. I then pressed further, inquiring specifically about whether the procedure required prior notice. The representative said, "There may be slight variations in how different presidents handle these matters, but I'll be sure to remind Elena about the rules." This ambiguous reply did little to ease my concerns and only reinforced the feeling that my questions were being brushed aside. The more I learned from the HOA, the more it seemed that my worries were not being taken seriously. I resolved to take a more proactive approach. If Elena wasn't following the proper rules, I needed to know why and whether it was a one-off occurrence or part of a larger pattern. A couple of days later, while checking the mail at the community mailbox, I ran into Isabel. We exchanged our usual pleasantries, but I couldn't help but ask directly, "Do you know anything about these unannounced HOA inspections? Why would they show up without notice?" Isabel looked at me thoughtfully, as if trying to recall her own experience, then said, "That's odd. I actually had a similar experience a while back. Elena came by and was extremely pushy. I thought it was strange at the time." Her comment resonated with my own growing sense that Elena's overreach wasn't an isolated incident, but possibly indicative of a larger issue within the HOA. That evening, determined not to let the matter drop, I decided to dig deeper. I sifted through my old emails and, to my surprise, found a proper inspection notice from the HOA issued a few months earlier. It was exactly as it should have been, a standard notice, clear and precise, complete with a specific date and a request for homeowners to prepare for the inspection. I printed out a copy and set it aside, certain that I might need it later as evidence when I confronted the HOA about their process. The very next day, I called the HOA again, this time with a firmer tone. I was no longer just asking questions. I was making it clear that I was well aware of the proper procedures and that I would not let this oversight go unchallenged. I spoke with a different representative, one who sounded significantly more knowledgeable. I asked again about the inspection process and whether Elena had adhered to the proper protocol. Inspections are typically scheduled with prior notice to homeowners, the representative confirmed. If someone shows up without notice, that's not how it's supposed to be done. Hearing that brought me a measure of relief. I wasn't wrong to be questioning Elena's actions. I then pressed, "What do you plan to do about it?" The response was less than reassuring. "I'll be sure to bring this up at the next board meeting. You know, HOA rules can sometimes be interpreted differently by different people. I'll follow up with Elena and ensure everything is on track." At that moment, I wasn't sure whether to feel vindicated by their promises or more frustrated by the bureaucracy that seemed determined to delay a resolution. It appeared that the board intended to address the issue, yet a nagging doubt persisted in my mind that nothing substantial would change. The HOA, after all, was a slow-moving bureaucracy where progress was measured in months rather than days, and I felt like just one voice among many complaints. Later that same week, I encountered Elena again, this time by the mailbox, at what seemed to be the worst possible moment. She greeted me with her trademark overly bright smile, saying, "How's everything going, Liam?" I nodded and replied in kind, "I'm doing well," but then I added, "I still don't understand why the inspection was carried out without any notice." For a moment, she simply stared at me with a smile that quickly tightened before she replied in a measured tone, "It's all part of the process. You'll hear from the HOA soon. I'm sure everything's fine." Now, as I write this final update, I feel compelled to recount how events escalated in ways I never anticipated. What began as a seemingly minor issue with Elena's unannounced inspection soon snowballed into a series of incidents that left me with an overwhelming mix of emotions. I had expected that after Elena's visit and the subsequent discovery of the HOA's failure to follow proper procedure, the board would address the matter quietly. A few days after my conversation with the HOA, I received an email from the board. At first, the email was a standard message, thanking me for bringing the issue to light and reassuring me that Elena would be reminded of the proper protocols. However, the email ended with a startling final line. "We have decided to suspend Elena from her duties as HOA president while we conduct an internal review of her actions." I wasn't sure how to feel about that decision. On one hand, it felt satisfying to see some accountability, but on the other hand, a suspension with so little explanation did not seem like a long-term solution, especially since Elena's behavior had been a pattern rather than an isolated lapse. I had thought that would be the end of it, but then events took another unexpected turn. About a week later, I heard a knock at the door again when I was least expecting it. I hesitated for a moment before opening the door, and I was taken aback to find Elena standing there once more, this time clutching a stack of papers. Her expression was markedly different from before. There was a seriousness in her eyes and a determined set to her jaw, as if she had come with an urgent mission. Without offering any greeting or pleasantries, she stated flatly, "I'm here to collect some documents. I'm on HOA business regarding the inspection, and we need to finalize everything." Given everything that had happened up to that point, I felt a deep sense of discomfort at her presence and resolved not to let her back into my home. "I'm not letting you in, Elena," I said firmly. "You are not authorized to be here right now. You're suspended, and I've already spoken with the board about this." Elena paused, as if weighing her next words carefully. Then in a cold tone, she said, Don't make this harder than it has to be, Liam. You don't want to regret this. Before I could respond further, she stepped forward and attempted to push past me. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just a routine visit. Elena was trying to force her way into my home again, even though she had no right to do so, clearly attempting to leverage her position even after her suspension. I pushed her back, making it unmistakably clear that I would not allow her to enter. What happened next was a rapid descent from a tense standoff to outright chaos. Frustrated by my refusal, Elena made a sudden move toward the door, and before I could react further, she called for help. I wasn't sure who she was contacting, but within a few minutes, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air as the police arrived. I was completely stunned when the officers explained that Elena had called them, alleging that I was preventing her from performing her duties as an HOA official, and even claiming that I had physically assaulted her. I found it impossible to believe the version of events she was attempting to spin. I maintained that I had only refused to let her in, yet she was twisting the story entirely. The officers, initially confused by the conflicting accounts, eventually realized that the situation was far more murky than Elena's narrative suggested. They asked her to step aside and explain her side of the story, but Elena refused to back down. She insisted repeatedly that I had assaulted her by blocking her from entering my home, doing everything in her power to shift the blame onto me. As she raised her voice, claiming that I was in clear violation of HOA rules by denying her access and that she had every right to be there, the situation escalated to a point where the officers finally intervened and instructed her to leave. Instead of complying, Elena grew increasingly agitated, began making threats, and yelled that I would regret her persistence. At that moment, the officers decided they had enough. Citing clear evidence of trespassing and obstruction, they placed her under arrest. I watched in complete disbelief as Elena was handcuffed and led away by the police. The whole experience felt utterly surreal. After everything that had transpired, after her repeated overreach and her insistence on forcing her way into my home, it was Elena who ended up facing serious legal consequences. This entire ordeal had evolved from what initially appeared to be a minor, routine HOA matter into a major confrontation that revealed Elena's ongoing abuse of her authority. Her unauthorized inspections, her blatant disregard for proper procedures, and her relentless attempts to coerce me had ultimately led to her arrest for trespassing and obstruction. I was left reeling, trying to comprehend how quickly a seemingly trivial issue could escalate into a serious legal matter, and I couldn't help but wonder what this dramatic turn of events would mean for our community moving forward.